Hey guys, I'm Dimension Jumper and today I'll be ranking every single boss from Super Mario Odyssey from worst to best. Now, the bosses in Super Mario Odyssey are probably, I would say some of the best bosses we've had in the Mario series. And yeah, I think I think they do, I think as well as because of the game they're in, bring a sort of new breath of fresh air to the game as a whole. And they give a lot of cool and interesting varieties of how you fight them and where their bosses or boss arenas are located, that sort of thing. And this video is just me ranking them from my least favorite to my favorite. So yeah. So for number 9 is Madame Brodel. And so this boss is probably my least favorite, mainly because it's a starter boss. It's not meant to be difficult, but when you compare Madame Brodel to the other bosses in the game, it's fairly simple. All you need to do is capture her golden chain chomp, and then just make sure you hit her with the face of her own chain chomp when she gets tired. I think why I'm not a huge fan of this boss is mainly because I think it's fairly easy, and obviously it's a Mario game. It's meant to be easy, but I think I think if because in the second fight it is a bit harder, but if I could have changed one small thing in the fight, is that if she could have had for the final part, she could have brought out another chain chomp maybe, and that could have it could be like a regular chain chomp, for example, and you could use that chain chomp to hit it into her golden one to make it to hit her, or something like that. But overall, it's not a really fun boss. It has merits, but I'm not a huge fan of this boss fight. So yeah, for number 8 is Mecha Wiggler. Now with Mecha Wiggler, this is it's basically a Wiggler but a robot, and it's interesting. It's fun because it takes place in New Donk City, which is the most well-known kingdom or part or area in the game because it was heavily used, I believe, in trailers and stuff like that. And this fight it has again with Madame Brodel. This fight does have its merits. Like I do like the whole concept of the fight. Like you have to just fight this giant robot wiggler, but overall it doesn't really do much because or in the sense that you can easily avoid its attacks because what it does is that it basically just rushes towards you after transporting or going into this portal thing, and then once it comes out of its portal after trying to tackle you, it releases these energy balls. But they can be very easy to avoid and dodge, and you will rarely get hit by its attacks. And I would say it does get a bit harder if you do the rematch in the Mushroom Kingdom, but overall it's not the best, but it's okay. For number 7 is the Brodels. Now these are basically the Koopalings of the game, in that you find them throughout various parts of the game and you fight them a couple of times. And I would say that the Brodels are probably the best or the better version of the Koopalings, because with the Koopalings, they were pretty much, I think everyone can agree that the Koopalings in games like, I believe, from Super Mario Wii onwards, they were kind of getting a bit stale in terms of just them being brought back just for the sake of bringing them back. But with the Brodels, they're basically helping out Bowser prepare for his wedding with Peach, and I think the Brodels are a lot better than the Koopalings, mainly because there's 4 of them, so that's pretty much cutting them in half in terms of how many you have to fight. But also, they've all got their own unique attacks. So you've got one that can throw his hat that has spikes on. You've got one that has bombs in her hair. You've got one that spits out poison. You've got one that uses his own hats as an attack, but it's slightly different to the one that throws his hats. And these are so cool, and I think it's a really cool way of fighting them. And I do like how in Bowser's Kingdom, you get to fight them together at the final part, but they're in the giant mech robot thing, and then you can rematch them on part of the moon. But this is a much harder fight because you have to not only fight all four of them consecutively, as well as fighting their robots again, but you're on the moon, which means there's less gravity, and then you have to try and like avoid all their attacks, but also time your own attacks to hit them when you're on the moon. So, yeah, overall, the Broodals, even though you do fight them a couple of times, they are a lot better than the Koopalings in terms of a boss fight. So, yeah. For number 6 is Bowser. Now, Bowser, I would say his fights are quite fun. I think this is where the boss fights kind of start to get a bit better. And with Bowser's fights, you get to fight him twice in the main game, and then I believe one more time once you've collected a certain amount of moons, and the other picture in the church on the moon gets filled out, and then that becomes a harder fight. But if you look at his two main story fights, they are quite fun, and I do like how they're done, because Bowser basically throws its hat, as well as several clones of its hat, and it's basically up to you to get to the real hat and then use the boxing gloves, because apparently Bowser's clothes, or Bowser's hat, has mechanical boxing gloves, and you have to basically avoid all the rocks and stuff he throws at you, and then he'll do like a spin attack with his tail, as well as trying to hit you with his fist and stuff, and his flames. And this fight, or the fights you do, are quite fun. The harder fights you do is on the moon, and it's really fun. And I think when you compare this to the other Bowser fights in some of the other 3D Mario games, like in Galaxy or Galaxy 2 or 64, I think this fight with Bowser in Odyssey is probably better-ish than in 64, because in that game, you just spin him around and hit bombs. I think it's slightly better than that fight, in my personal opinion, but not as good as the fights in Mario Galaxy 1. And maybe 2, I'm not 100% sure. I think, depending on how I'm feeling, the Galaxy 2 fight is better than the Odyssey fights, but in other days, the Odyssey fight is better than the Galaxy 2 Bowser fight. So, yeah. For number 5 is Torque Drift. I hope I'm pronouncing that word right. And this is the boss of the Wooded Kingdom, which is basically stealing all of the plants. And this fight it's very fun. I think it's quite interesting because you have to use the onion capture. I'm not 100% sure of the name at the moment, but you have to use that capture to not only hit the orbs that's protecting it from getting from the boss getting any damage, but also you have to avoid all of its lasers. And the rematch definitely makes it a whole lot harder, because in the rematch it basically makes it makes lasers, but the heights will vary. So sometimes you'll have one laser being shot out, or in other times he'll have all of its lasers being shot, and you have to avoid all of those lasers. And then you have to try and attack its main central circuit dome thing. And yeah, it's a very fun boss, and I think it has a lot of cool elements. Like, if you wanted to try and attack its main orbs, you have to try and go through all of the blocks that they're being covered with. And yeah, overall, it's a really, really interesting and fun boss. So yeah. For number 4 is Cookateel. Now, this boss is basically the boss of the main boss of the Luncheon Kingdom. And what I like about this fight is that the whole boss arena is in a giant cooking pot, and you have to avoid all of the falling projectiles around the boss fight arena. And what I like about this is that Cooktail will sometimes spew out this sort of like weird lava gunk, and will use that to use as projectiles to try and hit Mario. And they will all change in terms of how they're done. So, for example, the first attack or the first wave that it does is basically a straight line, and it's very easy to avoid. The next one is a sort of zigzag, and then the last one will be splatter shots, and then try to go from like splatter point to splatter point, trying to hit Cricketeal. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting way of doing a boss fight because you don't really get to go into certain boss arenas in certain areas or in unique boss arenas, because a lot of the boss fights in Mario Odyssey are just your basic, oh, here's your basic boss arena. But with the Cricketeal, it still takes place in a giant cooking pot, and that's really cool. And I kind of wish more boss fights did something like that, where you're in a unique, interesting boss arena and you use that area to your advantage. So yeah. For number 3 is Knack Low Tech. Now this boss fight is basically a giant sort of pyramid head thing with rocket arms, and this fight is it's one of those fights that uses the whole hand thing advantage sort of thing, in terms of like you have to capture one of the boss's hands and to hit them with them. And yeah, that's a really unique way of using the hand gimmick of a boss to your advantage. And it will do stuff like it will use its hands to either slam on the ground, slam together to hit Mario, use them as rocket projectiles, and when you do capture one of the hands, it will use its non-captured hand to throw ice chunks at you, and then as the fight continues and goes on, the non-captured hand will switch positions and it'll go faster, and it'll be a lot more difficult to try and hit its face. And yeah, it's a really interesting, unique boss. It's pretty simple, like a lot of the other bosses in the game, but it's a fight that's quite interesting, and again, similar to Cricketeal. With Cricketeal's fight, it takes place in a giant pot or cooking pot with Knuckle Tech. I think that's how you say it. I'm not 100% sure. I could be wrong. It takes place underneath the Sand Kingdom, in this area where ice falls. And again, it's another unique, interesting way of fighting a boss where you have to fight a lot of different projectiles. So yeah. For number 2 is Malusque Lancer. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I could be wrong. I think I'm mispronounced that word, the first word. But this is the boss fight of the Seaside Kingdom. Now, this fight takes place. It makes you have to like go use one of the squid power-ups or the squid captures, and this is a really, I would say, quite intense fight, because with the squid captures, they are encased in a ball of water, and if you want to recover water, you have to find or land on the ocean or one of the water spouts that's going into the giant glass in the center of the kingdom. And with this particular boss, he will throw out different projectiles, like a giant lance rocket thing, as well as seashells, or giant seashells, and he will spin about. And I'd say it can get annoying at times, because you will be doing an attack on him, and he will at the last second just move in a different direction, and then you have to go in the same direction that he does, which makes you lose a lot more water. And it does get annoying at times, especially in the rematch. But yeah, it's one of those fights that's quite cool, and you have to be quite use your attacks at basically a certain time. So that's what I'm trying to go with. So yeah, it's a really fun fight. So yeah, and for number 1 is the Ruined Dragon. Now, I think a lot of people would have expected this boss to be in the top spaces or in the top places, because this is a very difficult fight on your first attempt, because when you look at the other bosses that you fought up until that point, they were fairly easy. You've got the Broodals, you've got Bowser, the first Bowser fight, you've got the Cookateel, and you've got all the other bosses that you fought up until that point. But with the Ruined Dragon, this fight is really, really intense, and mainly because he will throw out electricity-based powers or electricity-based breath attack, which will turn into like these rolling blades of electricity. He'll then slam his head onto the floor, which will create shock waves of electricity, and during the final part of the fight, the electricity will go all over the boss arena, and that's so difficult because you have to not only dodge all of the electricity, but make sure your landing is precise, and then you can jump over the electricity again, and then just repeat that a couple of times. And then there's obviously the rematch, where that's really difficult. It's basically 100 times harder. Well, even though it's still easy to fight him, it's still the rematch is still a lot harder to do because you still have to avoid a whole ton of electricity and just trying to get on his head. And also, his weak spot is being guarded by a helmet, which you have to take off by throwing your cap at these different anchor points. And if you don't do it in time, the dragon will throw you off its head, and you have to dodge all of its attacks again, and land on its weak spot. So yeah, so that's been me ranking all of the Super Mario Odyssey bosses from worst to best. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.